said, why don't we read it again, because Mary, we're going to start form with capital F. It's on page 9 near the bottom. It says Plato.
Eternal, unchanging, spiritual, exemplar, or essence of which physical things are copies. Example given, the force itself, also called idea.
So, remember, we talked a bit about the four causes. We haven't really done too much with that, but in the logic textbook, right, formal, final, material, efficient causes. In Plato, in a sense, you could say there's another kind of cause or a different kind of cause, which is exemplary causality. An exemplar is that, it's like the model, right? So the form of horse, which is hoarseness, right? So for him, hoarseness actually exists, and it exists in this heaven of forms, like the reading from the Republic, right? This whole elaborate allegory of the cave where when you leave the physical world, you see the forms themselves. They're also called ideas, right? They're not material, they're immaterial. And things are what they are by participating in the forms. As the next definition says, right, participation. So that's his metaphysics, right? Metaphysics is his understanding of how reality works, right? So why don't we'll keep reading these and then we can read some of the handouts, because the nature of reading is I want to cover everything. James, you want to read the next one in curvy brackets? Plato's three kinds, cognition.
Confuses mental and real orders by attributing what is true of one's concept to a real thing.
Okay, so that's how Aristotle is going to criticize the Platonic forms. Just because it's true, is my concept immaterial? Yes, but does that mean that there's a horse itself that's immaterial? Aristotle's going to say no, there's just the nature of horse that I'm abstracting. My mind is abstracting a concept from the shared nature. James, you want to skip down, see where it says Plato's three kinds of cognition in a smaller type?
Plato's three kinds of cognition. True opinion. One knows that it is so, but cannot explain why. A. Have the right conclusion, but wrong or no reason.
All right, we haven't quite got there in logic, but right, we've kind of seen that. We talked a little bit about arguments, and in the Craved handout, right, we saw some examples. We talked a bit about that you could have a true conclusion, but you could have bad reasoning leading to it. So remember, Aristotle's the first, as we say, ex professo logician, meaning actually writing treatises on logic, as we'll see shortly, like the categories, right? But even though he was the first one to actually write treatises, Socrates and Plato are already using logic, and you can see that there, right? So that's a helpful idea, right? That I can have a true opinion, so you know that, you know that it's wrong to underpay people, but you can't really explain why. Now, typically, you probably would be able to explain why, because that's pretty commonsensical, but something else more complicated or more disputed. Okay.
2. Mathematical thought. One can explain mathematical notions, circle, square, etc.
etc means etc, meaning in English we just say etc. We keep certain Latin expressions in the English language, right? It means and other things. So this is leading. So this is from the Republic reading, right? On the first page or two of that reading, he goes through these three kinds of cognition, and he's working towards that latter idea of which he's going to call the divided line, like working your way up from the physical world, which is a realm of opinion, meaning I'm not really certain, I don't really have truth about the physical world, but then mathematics is the bridge to the spiritual world, because I do have truth about mathematics. Like I know that every triangle has three sides, there's no exceptions, whereas if I say every horse is four-legged, someone can say, oh, well, I saw a horse that was in a battle and only has three legs, right? So we made a distinction about that regarding the nature. That distinction is from Aristotle, so we're not there yet. So Plato's trying to find the grounds of truth and certainty, and the way to do that is to get away from the physical world into the abstract realm. So mathematics, can you see how you have absolute certainty and in a sense you have absolute truth that you don't have in the physical world, because all dogs have 4 legs except for the one that's, I don't know, only has 2 or that only has 3 or right, we're familiar with that from experience. So mathematical thought is a bridge into talking about the forms. And so that would be the first way to understand what he means by a form, right? What he wants to say. Okay?
3. Wisdom. One contemplates forms and thus can explain or define.
And even in the cave allegory, there's all these intermediate steps. Like first you have to turn away from what you see on the wall, the illusions. And then when you turn around, there are these people who are parading around with I guess statuettes or statues. So those would be like the mathematicals that you can start thinking about. Mathematicals, it starts to get you to think more abstractly and less in terms of the material world. And then you work your way up eventually to the form of, the highest form is the form of goodness. Okay, Jake?
Divided line allegory. Bottom up. Opinion. Doxa.
So the word doxa is, certain these words, this is why you guys learn philosophy first, right? Because I don't know if you guys, the word doxology, doxa there means like praise, ology, right? It's word of speech of praise. So, right, logos, doxa, these words mean a lot of different things. But if you think about orthodoxy or heterodoxy, orthos is right, doxa in that case means opinion or belief, so having right belief. Heterodoxy, having kind of belief that's not, that's hetero means like different from the orthodox belief. So the first half of the line, so this is, like I said, in book 6, New Republic, he's talking about working your way up to the forms. And so he says the bottom that deals with the world around us is the realm of opinion, which, I mean, I don't think, did Parmenides? Yeah, Parmenides did use that word, didn't he? Yeah. If you look on page 7, you don't have to, but remember Parmenides, it says there, way of opinion. So do you see his indebtedness to Parmenides? Remember, Wheelwright was saying the natural sequence, the natural follow-up to reading the pre-Socratics is to read Plato. So we don't spend that much time on Plato, but by having spent time with the pre-Socratics, you can see like where this is coming from, right? We've seen this before, the way of opinion, right? Back-turning mortal paths, darkness, shadow, illusions. So the realm of day, but it's a much more elaborate and better thought out account of that kind of basic metaphysical dualism, right? It's a dualism because the physical world is actually a place of darkness and illusions, but then the true world is the spiritual world, which to some degree we agree with, right? But we don't want to. The reason that Aristotle is so popular with someone like Aquinas is because we don't want to say the body is an illusion. We don't want to say the body doesn't exist. We don't want to say the world isn't real. So that's why when Aristotle was translated into Latin in the 1200s, 1100s, everyone's so excited. It's what they call an Aristotelian Renaissance, because it's actually much more, up until then, most of the followers of the church are Platonists. Because that's the only thing that is on offer, right? They don't read Greek. So Augustine's a Neoplatonist. It's just the Neoplatonist kind of standard, run-of-the-mill Neoplatonist. And then when Aristotle's translated about 700 years after Augustine, it's a big deal because it actually makes much more sense with Christianity, right, to not say that the physical world is an illusion. Not that Augustine agrees with that, but there's a tension there. There's a tension between being a Platonist and a Christian, right, as you can see. Huh?
So there was innovation in philosophy in the Greeks from pre-Socratics through Socrates to Plato and Aristotle that clarified a lot of these issues. Why does it, for over 700 years, why wasn't there exploration from Platonism into something else?
I mean, it's basically a language barrier. So the Greek fathers could have read Aristotle, and the funny thing is they could read Aristotle, right? Because they could read Greek. But even them, they tend to be Platonists. So it's because Plato does have such a clear, it's very clear in Plato that the spiritual world is superior. In Aristotle, there is a spiritual God, so Aristotle does have God in the soul, but there's not this whole spiritual realm that he's constantly talking about. So you could see how if you're trying to emphasize the importance of like the otherworldly, it's the kind of otherworldly aspect, I guess, of Christianity at that point, or Christianity, yeah, at that point. I don't want it because it's also the East. But it is kind of an interesting question, like how is it that over all those centuries, because the Latins, it's a language barrier. Like they just couldn't read it and it hadn't been translated, so it might as well, right? Like anything now, I don't know, something that's in Chinese that you don't like Chinese, it'd be nice to read it, but, and right, there's not all these means of information that we have. But that the Greek fathers, now some of them were more the like the Antiochian school, the ones from Antioch were Aristotelian. The ones from Alexandria were more Platonic, which kind of reflects the culture of Alexandria, actually. A lot of the major Neoplatonists were there, so maybe even kind of a cultural aspect there. So, my old history professor in high school used to always say, nothing in history is monocausational. He was a very colorful person too. He was entertaining, but he would always, he had certain mantras. He would be like, nothing in history is monocausational. So that is true for history of philosophy as well. There's various factors, like even the cultural thing of just Alexandria, Neoplatonism being the dominant. So someone like Origen, for example, you can see with him. He's from Alexandria, so you could see that being a major factor, I think, with him. Okay, so you see how we're improving very significantly on Parmenides. So, right, from what that very simple account that he had given, that with all those things, it didn't seem to make sense.
Conjecture, Cassia. Images such as shadows and reflections.
So I'm giving you the Greek words here. Like I said, doxa, well, heterodoxy, orthodoxy, doxology, right? These terms are all going to be there in theology, partially because the early church fathers were largely Platonists. So this is what they're reading, right? And even, even Augustine didn't read Greek, but he certainly knew that doxa meant, opinion, right? He knew that. So icon, that's where we get our word icon. Everybody remember, obviously, right? Icons. And icon is an image. Remember, in the East, icons are what they're right, venerate. So it's an icon in Greek is called eikon, E-I-K-O-N. So eikasia is basically thinking in terms of images, would be a literal translation. It can also mean conjecture, but I would say the etymology is thinking in terms of images, right? Because it's from that word eikon. And so he starts off saying, well, the bottom rank of knowledge or cognition is just a reflection, right? When I see a reflection in a mirror, is that real? No, it doesn't exist. It looks like it does, but does it? No, right? A shadow, maybe it's late at night and you see a shadow and you think it's a bear, and actually no, it's just a bush or something, right? So this is his epistemology, his account of knowledge, and how do we have certainty?
Belief, pistis.
So pistis is the word in the New Testament for faith, right? Faith or belief in Latin. It's fides.
Physical objects such as animals, plants, artifacts.
So see, this is his dualism, right? It's metaphysical, it's anthropological, and it's epistemological. Meaning it's about reality itself, right? The matter doesn't really exist. Therefore, my body, does it feel like it exists? Sure does, but no, it doesn't. Right? We have to use our intellect to not trust our senses when I seems like it's solid and real and all that. And so that's the epistemology. But the anthropology then is, if my body isn't real, that my soul is what's really me. My body is not really me, is one thing he says in the first Alcibiades. So notice, for everything around, like I am in this room right now, that's just a belief. That's not certain knowledge. I believe that I'm in the room. You see how it's kind of downgrading it? Instead of saying, like, what would we normally say in terms of common sense about being in the room?
You're in the room.
Do I just believe that I'm in this room, or what do I do?
I know.
I know, exactly. Would say, like, no, I know I'm in this room right now. Like, I know I'm not dreaming. Like, ouch. Like, Whack. Take that, Descartes. Just start beating yourself up to show Descartes that he's wrong. Because remember, Descartes said, oh, this could all be a dream. Like, whack.
I'll show you Descartes.
Cutting yourself, burning yourself. No. Anyway, that's from all those years of teaching modern philosophy. That's why all the moderns, right? They're all influenced by Descartes and that skepticism.
Your best friends.
So I only have belief, right? See, the choice of words is important. So anything around me that does it really exist? Well, I believe that it exists, but in reality, what exists is the spiritual world.
Understanding, noesis, two different methods.
So nous is intellect, and noesis is intellection, understanding. Okay.
Reason, theonoia.
So that's a good translation for that. Dia means through. Noia is similar to nous, so like thinking through something.
Skills, arithmetic, geometry, etc. Immovable mathematical objects.
So see how he's using math as that bridge to knowledge of the forms. Okay.
By reasoning from postulated definitions, e.g. of a point, line, etc., one attains eternal mathematical truths, e.g. 2 + 2 = 4, but not as based on contemplation of the corresponding forms, ideas, ideal numbers, form a point, line, etc.
So I'm basically explaining what he says in the text. He makes that point, like 433 or something, 432. And you can see from his text, this is why we're not jumping right into it, because it's a lot of work to unpack what he's saying, right? This is laying it out, but when the way that he states it, it's not so clear, right? That's how it is in primary text. But this is the mathematics as a bridge to knowledge of the forms. Okay.
Many mathematical twos, triangles, etc., but only one form of two, triangle, etc.
Okay. So the idea is that let's say I have 2 + 2 + 2 = 6, right? Well, in terms of math, I can have many twos, right? There's 3 of them. I could have 100 of them, right? I could write 100. But his idea is that all those multiple twos, there has to be one form of two that they all participate in. So participation, now we're getting at a more abstract level of participation. So even in terms of math, there's still the quest for something simple, for one unified concept. That's the argument he's making. They write triangles. I could draw 10 triangles on the board. Isosceles, equilateral, scaling, all these different kinds of triangles, right? Different sizes, shapes, etc. But they all participate in the one form of triangle. Okay?
Knowledge, episteme,
Or episteme.
episteme. Philosophy, contemplate forms, ideas of goodness, beauty, justice, etc.
And just, so Plato is going to be on the essay, right? Because he's just a major figure, so you do need to be able to write about him for the essay. And make sure you capitalize the F and I, because remember, it's a unique thing. Like, there's only one form of triangle, right? So it's not just, in Aristotle, the F or I would be lowercase. But for Plato, it's the one eternal form that, for him, it's not really clear whether, it seems like they exist outside of God. Because he does talk about God, not a lot, but here and there he does mention it, as the Green Plotinus book. You can look at that if you want to see the text. But he talks much more about the form. So the impression you get is that there's God and then there's the forms. Like, and God is looking at the forms maybe when he made the world, but they seem to be separate from him in that spiritual realm. Okay. So do you see how the top level now, we reach knowledge, where we're certain, we have truth, and then philosophy. So it's funny, he doesn't include wisdom on here, but I think it's sufficiently clear that, right, wisdom is knowing the forms and contemplating them. Okay, Brother James?
Humans are enchained in a cave. This represents the body as a prison and the physical world as a place of shadows. The only way to discover the truth or become educated is to escape into the world of ideas. Contemplate the ideal forms of one's mind alone.
Okay, so,
God bless you.
so, right, this is, I mean, Plato is really, that's why he's so famous, right? The cave allegory, he manages to include, right, his everything basically in this one allegory. His metaphysics, his epistemology, his view of ethics, right? His real, in a sense, his view of political philosophy. It's all there, right? So this is the human condition, the human predicament, according to Plato, right? So we're all chained in this cave, looking at the wall, which there's a fire behind us with the shadows being projected onto the wall. People have not, it's not been lost on people. It's kind of like a cinema, right? The cinemas, they project something, right? Kind of interesting how that image has contemporary resonance, I would say. And but they can't turn their heads or anything, and so this is the body as a prison, right? And the physical world as not true reality. So the only way to discover truth, because right at the beginning of it, he says, I'm going to give you an allegory to talk about education, which is the word paideia in Greek, which is very, actually Heidegger stresses that a lot. Heidegger is a contemporary philosopher, but he also did a lot of history of philosophy, and he stresses that a lot. He says this is about education. So the goal is to escape into the world of ideas. So he talks about how someone eventually realizes that they basically realize that this is not satisfactory, their situation. And so they turn around and they see that there's actually these statues that, right, they're carrying around, that the imagery being projected from. Then they make their way past the statues, past the fire. He says the fire represents the sun, right, the source of life for the visible world. And then when they get out of the cave, they make it to the spiritual world. And then he says the sun of the spiritual world is the form of the good. So first he says their eyes have to adjust, and they see whatever forms of like the horse or the cow or simple things. And eventually they see like the form of justice. And then eventually they realize that the same way that the sun is the source of light for our eyes, the form of the good is a source of light, quote unquote, for knowing the forms, the lower forms. So there's actually 3 allegories. There's a divided line allegory, which you just read. There's a cave allegory. There's the sun allegory too, where he talks about the sun being is how you're able. Visible light is how you're able to see things. So he's saying there must be some intellectual light which enables you to know things. And the idea of there being an intellectual light has a long history. I mean, it obviously has a strong parallel in the New Testament, right? That same kind of imagery is used in the context of revelation, theology. So you escape into the world of ideas and contemplate the ideal forms, which, right, are only your mind can see them, not your eyes. And then he even, the ethical aspect, right, then he even says, well, if someone goes back into the world having contemplated the forms and tells the people about what they saw and says, this world you're living in is not real, it's not important, things you're concerned about are trivial, then he says that they'll persecute him and maybe even put him to death, an obvious reference to what happened to Socrates. Although Socrates himself, Aristotle mentions the forms that, Aristotle says that Socrates did not teach the forms. So this is the middle Plato. So Republic 6, this is not Socrates' ideas, right? Socrates definitely taught virtue ethics. He definitely defined things, like using logic to define them, like the idea of genus and species. But he didn't have this elaborate metaphysics. So the elaborate metaphysics is actually from Plato. Okay, so that's the cave allegory. And I mean, I don't know, you could, once again, you could maybe see the appeal of this for the early church fathers, right? Like if you think about it, I mean, it's kind of what you're doing in seminary, right? You come out of the world, whatever you're doing before in the world, busy with all that, and then you're coming to a setting that's supposed to be more contemplative, right? Where you have your divine office, you have mass, you have all completely different kind of mode of life in that way, and you're given leisure, right, for prayer and things like that. And so, and then you're going to eventually go back into the world, right, as parish priest, right? It's an active vocation. You're not going to live in a monastery. So you'll go back into the world and try to share what you contemplate. I mean, actually, the Dominicans have a motto, which is contemplata alis tradere, to give to others what you contemplated. But in a sense, that's also true, right, for the parish priesthood. I mean, because you're saying mass and praying, and you're sharing based on that. So you could see the appeal of this, right, immediately for Christians, why they liked it so much. Whereas Aristotle is also wonderful, but he doesn't use allegories, he doesn't use metaphors. This you can see it's very colorful, which Scripture itself uses a lot of allegories and metaphors. Aristotle is very dry, like you can see that with logic, right? How it's pretty dry, propositions, oppositions. And it's not so lyrical, let's say. So therefore, you could see why this would be. But maybe there was a kind of maturity of Christianity that was reached in the Middle Ages, where they were willing, someone like Aquinas was willing to say, okay, I'm going to make a more systematic philosophy that's not so concerned with like the lyrical qualities of things, of how I write. Okay, who's next?
Dualism. The world is divided into two mutually opposed elements, with the spiritual superior to the material, reality versus illusion, for example, Plato.
Okay, so that dualism is certainly metaphysical, which we did see that in Parmenides, right? But it's much clearer here. We're not just being told everything is being. And it's anthropological, that the soul is truly you, the body is not really you. The reincarnation, right? That your soul goes from body to body, trying to make its way back to the spiritual world. That's another aspect that he's consistent about, right? He doesn't. So another thing about Plato, he doesn't really change his mind on the fundamentals. It's minor philosophers will often, like someone like Bertrand Russell was constantly changing his mind. I don't know, apparently there's like 4 or 5 different Bertrand Russells, depending when you read him. He kept changing his mind. Hilary Putnam, big analytic philosopher, constantly changed his mind. But Plato, these things are consistent, right, throughout. Okay, so, all right, so that's the Republic. And just, let's keep going. Oh,
Plato's
so,
definition.
just, so the next 2 are from the Symposium. And so this is, once again, right, see the comparison of dialectical ladder. So the Symposium is like a party, a dinner party. And it's really a masterpiece of world literature. It should be. I mean, I think because there's about a dozen or half a dozen speeches, and each speech is different. So, and each person, the very idea of like everyone having their say, like that's a very Athenian Greek idea, right? Like, and each one gives their own opinion about the topic for the dinner party is to define what love is. And so there's about 7 or 8, and each one gives their own. So, and even quite opposed and quite different. So Aristophanes, for example, gives a speech about what love is. Remember, he's one of the people who kind of helped get Socrates put to death, according to the Apology. Plato is extremely magnanimous because he includes Aristophanes in the Symposium and lets him have his say. And he has, a 4-page speech from Aristophanes, which is, funny and humorous. Agathon was, I think, a tragic tragic playwright. He gives the celebration is because he just got awarded the prize for, I think, his tragedy or his play. So he gives his, Alcibiades gives his, and then the last one is Socrates. So after everyone else, Socrates gives his discourse on what love is. It's really a masterpiece. And it's also not nearly as long as the Republic. It's only about 100 pages. And so, of course, right, it's Plato. Socrates is speaking for Plato here, largely because it's a middle dialogue, right? Maybe not 100%, but the forms feature prominently, so that lets you know that it's Plato, right? And so he's going to define love. They define love in more, like you'd expect, right? More pragmatic ways, more sentimental ways, and so on and so forth. Okay.
Plato's definition of love. The desire for the perpetual possession of good and beautiful things. Desire to give birth to beauty.
Right, so that's how Plato defines it. Socrates also, it's not just Plato speaking through the mouth of Socrates. Then Socrates introduces another person called Diotima. So it's Socrates speaking through Plato, speaking through Diotima. It's it's pretty crazy, the multi-layered, that kind of literary analysis could have a field day with that, right? All these different registers. But right, there's no evidence that Diotima is a historical figure. It's just, but the point is she's a midwife, and what does a midwife do? A midwife helps people to give birth, or helps women to give birth. So, sorry. Probably the influence of the culture is probably somehow, right? If I was speaking in 1920, I probably wouldn't have said that. And so that's what the philosopher is doing, is helping people to give birth in beauty, and giving birth in beauty means virtue. So living virtuously, because Plato was actually called the virgin philosopher. He never got married. Aristotle did get married. So you can see it probably has personal relevance for Plato himself. Another reason for him to be so popular, right, amongst the early Christians, because he basically lived a celibate life, right? And so, and as he's certainly not saying that biological fertility is not good, but he's saying a higher form of fertility or fruitfulness is, in terms of spiritual, good.
Is this essentially like Gnosticism? Like people have special knowledge, special insight, gain through?
So the reason it might make you think that is because the Gnostics, who were 1st century AD, they heresy, right? They're syncretists. They're syncretizing a whole bunch of stuff, and one of the things they're syncretizing is well, at that point, Middle Platonism. So they're making a blend of about half a dozen different things, like magic, and what we would really call occultism, Platonic ideas. So like they'll mention reincarnation, and so yes, there is a healthy portion of that syncretism is Platonism. But whereas so this is, it kind of comes down to kind of which Plato, right? The fathers of the church are very careful to take what's good from Plato. This is why they talk about spoliating the Egyptians, which I don't like that image at all. I think it's very kind of fideistic. But the reason that they'll say that is because they're taking whatever's good from Plato but leaving what's bad, right? So they're saying, okay, well, we'll take that the soul is immortal, which Pythagoras had said. We'll take that, we should live according to virtue. I know, we'll take that celibacy can be a good thing. But then we're leaving out reincarnation. We're leaving out the dualism where the body doesn't actually exist. But then the Gnostics are going to take things that are bad. So they're going to say, oh, there is reincarnation. Oh, your body is just an illusion. Well, in that case, like Docetism, a lot of the early heresies come from Plato as well. So Docetism, right? Docio means to appear. So Christ only appeared to have a body. So Christ only appeared to be crucified. So there, in that sense, redemption, well, he wasn't actually crucified because he didn't really have a body. The body was an illusion, right? So see, and therefore now, but then how are you redeemed? Well, they have this whole Gnostic, complicated metaphysics of all these different things that they're inventing. So the reason it might sound similar to that is because they're using Plato amongst other things. Okay. So desire for perpetual possession of good and beautiful things. So right, the transience of things in Symposium, right? He says, well, if you love someone who's human, they can die. If you give birth physically, well, the person can, go away and never come back, right? So it's not permanent. Whereas virtue, he's saying, is permanent, and even more than that, contemplation of the highest spiritual things is permanent, and you can't be taken away from you. And then also the idea of fecundity, desire to give birth in beauty, right? Giving birth in beauty means beautiful actions, meaning he says also beautiful laws. So like just laws, just actions, moderate actions. These are all beautiful. You can see it's very appealing, right? You can see why the fathers of the church got so enthusiastic about this as opposed to like the 5 predicables. And it's everything we've been seeing, 10 categories, like, oh, whatever, fine, it's boring. This is, this will help people want to join the monastery out in the Tibaid or whatever, out in Egypt and live on cauliflower or something. Okay, Matthew?
Dialectical letter. Successively negating material, lower things so as to reach higher, immutable realities. ultimately the form of beauty.
Yeah, you see the appeal of this? I mean, it sounds like the Christian life, right? But it's also, like I said, the imagery. Like Plato is a very literary philosopher. He's a bit of a poet, right? I think you can see that. It's very colorful. It's very moving. It's very engaging. It can be very funny. The Symposium. There's all this stuff. There's all this banter. It's playful. Right, he's actually entertaining to read. Right? When you read Aristotle, like, okay, it's 5 predicates. Oh, the square of opposition. That's from Aristotle too. Okay, great. It doesn't have the same charm. Or it has an appeal, but it's a very different kind of appeal. So then this dialectical ladder, see all these images that are helping to make his point. So he talks about first, he says, we find other bodies beautiful, so there's a desire for beautiful bodies, right? But then he says, you realize that that's transient. That person is going to be old and wrinkled eventually. So, and then eventually they're going to die, or maybe they die when they're young. And so then you goes, well, how about beauty in general? Just the beauty of the natural world, like beautiful sunsets. But then, I don't know, sometimes it's rainy and sometimes it's overcast. So then you realize, well, then it's just spiritual beauty of souls that it doesn't matter if it's raining or overcast. It doesn't matter if the person's wrinkly and whatever, right? For us, we think of Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa, not a particularly, she wasn't a model. She would not have been a model, right? I mean, I wish I could have met her. I think she was really, really short. This is who God picks, right? The tiny little person, weighs like 100 pounds, right? But the inner beauty, right? So he goes, we need to forget about the physical beauty. And he's not saying it's bad. He's just saying you need to transcend it to spiritual beauty. But then what is it that makes a soul beautiful? Well, its virtue is that by which the soul is beautiful. Because like the virtuous actions, those who are we say, that's so beautiful, right? And so now for them it's not Mother Teresa, it's Socrates, right? Apparently Socrates was not particularly good looking. So he was self-denigrating, so he'd be like, I look like a satyr, I think he's making fun of himself, but he was outstanding for virtue. So then he goes, virtue, and then if virtue, there must be participating in this heavenly virtue. Their soul, which is spiritual, is participating in the heavenly spiritual virtue, and that's why how they're virtuous, metaphysically speaking. And eventually you work your way up to there has to be virtue itself. But then what is it that makes virtue good? What is it that makes it good? Is it just good in itself? Is virtue all of goodness? Is virtue all of beauty? No. Right? It's kind of like we were talking about in logic class a little bit last time. Commendable, right? Virtue commendable, are they coextensive? So to see the logic is behind this, but what for Aristotle is just logic about ideas, and also about the world around us. For him, is about this heavenly realm. So then he says there must be a form of, in the Republic he says there must be a form of goodness, which is that by which everything good is good. And in the Symposium, the highest form is the form of beauty. That's that by which everything beauty is beautiful. Beautiful is beautiful, whether it's the person or whether it's the sunset or the flower or higher. That's the ladder, is working your way up. Okay, so let's look at page 428 on the horizontal handout. Now that we've read the last definition, we can conclude with that because that's how it played out later in history after Plato. Aren't these virtues then? So this doesn't really matter. This is Adeimantus. And one of the people speaking here is actually Plato's brother. So that's definitely a hint that this is Plato speaking, right? So he does give you clues that it's not actually Socrates. But I do think that he does have a certain humility and modesty. I think it's very impressive, right, that he is disappearing as far as he's able to. But the fact, right, how would Socrates be having an extended conversation with Plato's brother, right? Socrates had already died. So this is Adeimantus. Well then, he must take the longer road. Robert, do you see there? Beginning of the Republic reading.
Yeah. Well then, he must take the longer road and put as much effort into learning as into physical training, for otherwise, as we were just saying, he will never reach the goal of the most important subject and the most appropriate one for him to learn.
Right, so in the Greek society, right, they had athleticism was very popular. They had, the Olympics. The Olympics started in 776 BC, So the Olympics have already been going for over 300 years. And just like nowadays, right, it's a lot more natural for a lot of people to spend a lot of time on sports and not much time on learning. So he's saying you should put as much energy into learning as into sports. Okay. Ricky, do you want to read the reply?
Aren't these virtues then the most important things? He asked, is there anything even more important than justice and the other virtues we discussed? There is something more important.
No, this is Socrates. So it doesn't show you, but this is
Okay.
Robert. Do you want to be Socrates?
Oh. There is something more important. However, even for the virtues themselves, it isn't enough to look at a mere sketch, as we did before, while neglecting the most complete account. It's ridiculous, isn't it, to strain every nerve to attain the utmost exactness and clarity about other things of little value, and not to consider the most important things worthy of the greatest exactness.
It certainly is, but do you think that anyone is going to let you off without asking you what this most important subject is and what it concerns?
No, indeed, and you can ask me too. You've certainly heard the answer often enough, but now either you aren't thinking or you intend to make trouble for me again by interrupting. And I suspect the latter, for you've often heard it said that the form of the good is the most important thing to learn about, and that it's by their relation to it that just things and others become useful and beneficial.
Right. So this is the form of the good, and they give a lowercase f, but the uppercase F and G shows you this is the unique form of the good. It's almost like reading him more like as if he's Aristotle, if you just call it the form of the good without, right? I mean, okay.
You know very well now that I am going to say this, and besides, that we have no adequate knowledge of it. And you also know that, if we don't know it, even the fullest possible knowledge of other things is of no benefit to us, any more than if we acquire any possession without the good of it.
Yeah, and the of it is not there in Greek. So see, the translation is kind of downplaying the metaphysical aspect and kind of making it sound more like he's like a modern empiricist, right? There's a good of things, but of it is not there in Greek, right? So both the lowercase letters, but I still use this translation because it's still, preferable. Okay, but be aware of that. It's just without the good with the capital G. Okay.
Or do you think that it is any advantage to have every kind of possession without the good? Or to know everything except the good, thereby knowing nothing fine or good?
No, by God, I don't.
So is there any advantage to have every kind of possession without the good, right? The good itself is what we want to contemplate, or to know everything except the good, right? And I mean, there's a very obvious scriptural parallel here, right? The pearl of great price, right? And I mean, maybe, I don't know if that idea had been circulating, who knows, right? Because certainly the Hellenistic Jews spoke Greek, and I mean, they could have read, I don't know how much they had access to this kind of thing. Okay.
And Robert Socrates, right?
Yeah. Usually they put it, but they don't write it here.
You can tell that they're brothers by the way they're arguing.
Yeah. Furthermore, who's?
Furthermore, you certainly know that the majority believe that pleasure is the good, while the most sophisticated believe that it is knowledge.
Indeed,
Okay.
I do.
Okay, so that's good for that section. So, pleasure is the good. That's what the many think. Then the more sophisticated think, well, the best thing would be to have knowledge. But he's saying we need to transcend the physical world. On the next page, at the bottom, this for those three kinds of cognition, true opinion. That's where he goes through that. Let's just read. We say that there are many. It's about 2/3 of the way down. Matthew, do you want to read? I don't know if you can see it there.
Which one? Sorry.
You.
I'm looking for
it. The numbers aren't cut off.
It's on 430.
Which
one? It's on 430.
Yeah, it's on the next page.
My bad.
Let's read this for a minute. Yeah, and then
We say
you could
that-
do the reply.
We say that many.
Yep.
We say that there are many beautiful things and many good things, and so on for each kind, and in this way we distinguish them in words.
We do.
And beauty itself and good itself, and all the things that we thereby set down as many, reversing ourselves, we set down according to a single form of each, believing that there is but one, and calling it the being of each.
That's true.
And we say that the many beautiful things and the rest are visible but not intelligible, while the forms are intelligible but not visible.
That's completely true.
With what part of ourselves do we see visible things?
With our sight.
And so audible things are heard by hearing, and with our other senses we perceive all the other perceptible things.
That's right.
Have you considered how lavish the maker of our senses was in making the power to see and be seen?
Can't say that I have.
So remember the Xenophon text, Socrates talking about God giving us our intellect, giving us our senses, right? The maker of our senses, right? That God created us, He made us with these capacities, these abilities. And this is the sun allegory, right? The comparison between basically my vision, you need light in order to see what's visible, and my intellect needs a light that comes from the form of the good in order to see, to comprehend what's intelligible. Intelligible meaning what's able to be understood. We can't read the whole thing. Do you want to go to the bottom of the page? Let's say page 431, Matthew. Let's say then. Page 431. Next.
Let's say then that this is what I called the offspring of the good, which the good begot as its analog.
So the sun is what the sun is in the physical world. The form of the good is in the spiritual, intelligible realm. And notice, and all these use of the word good, I would capitalize it to show we're not just talking about some abstract idea of good. We're not talking about the goodness present in the world. We're talking about a spiritual goodness itself that exists. Okay.
What the good itself is in the intelligible realm. In relation to understanding and intelligible things, the sun is in the visible realm in relation to sight and visible things.
How? Explain a bit more.
All right, let's skip. We're just going to skip around at this point. So, Matthew, do you want to read on the next page? Therefore, you should, near the bottom.
Yep. Therefore, you should also say that not only do the objects of knowledge owe their being known to the good, but their being is also due to it, although the good is not being, but superior to it in rank and power.
Okay, so notice the good here is the cause of being. So this idea that there's a cause of being, this is actually rather common, right, at this period in time. That for him, the good is the cause of being. But I think we saw in Anaxagoras, some of the pre-Socratics, I think Anaxagoras used some of that language too. We just read it, but I don't quite remember. But here he clearly says the good is the cause of being for everything else, right? And then he says the good itself is not being, but is superior to it. So he says the good, with a capital G, is higher than being. Now Aristotle is going to disagree with that, right? He's going to say that doesn't make sense. But Plotinus is going to agree with that. So the things we're talking about now with Plato, we're going through it kind of quickly. But when we read Plotinus, he's going to come back to these things, and he's going to be talking about the form of the good. So one question that's left unanswered here: which is higher, the form of the good, like in the Republic, or the form of beauty, like in the Symposium? Well, Plato doesn't say, right? So see what I mean? It's not all worked out, as you can kind of tell by reading it, right? So Plotinus is going to come back to that and say which one he thinks is higher. He's going to try to make a systematic version of Plato. He says here the good is higher than being. So Aristotle's going to disagree. So Plotinus is going to come to Plato's defense as a Neoplatonist and say, no, it does make sense for the good to be higher than being. Okay, page 433 is the divided line. He even gives you there on the page. 434 to 435 is the rationale for that. 436 is the cave, which basically you can read for yourself. It's quite readable and quite clear. Right? Education is turning the soul around from the worldly things to other worldly things. See why that was so popular as far as the church. And then you have this, the other is the text from the Symposium, where Diotima is someone, or Diotima, she's this midwife who's introduced, who Socrates is like, look, I don't know anything, can you give me wisdom? Well, obviously, right, there's no, it's just his theatrical way of going about things, Plato's way of writing, right? And she talks about basically the ladder of the ladder, giving birth and beauty, and so on. And also happiness, right? That's how you attain happiness. Okay? So, what is the aftermath of Plato? Well, as I just said, right? Aristotle's going to disagree with the forms. He's going to disagree with a lot of it. Not the ethics, but, right, the metaphysics. He agrees that there's a God. He agrees that there's an immaterial soul, but he rejects reincarnation. But let's read Aquinas on Platonic forms. Christian?
I'm sorry, what page?
On page 10 of the definition sheet. Whoops, last definition.
Aquinas on Platonic forms, two aspects. Superscript 6.
Yeah, you can read the footnote.
This dates back to Filio.
So, philo,
sorry.
I know in English sometimes we just pronounce it like as if it were English. In Latin, in Greek it would be philo, but we say philo judaeus.
Philo Judaeus. What is D?
D just means died.
Died 50 AD. Ideas are God's thoughts. Seneca died 65 AD. God has ideas of himself. Augustine died 430. The Neoplatonist Proclus died 485 in his Elements of Theology et al.
Okay. Et al means and others. I think et al is usually used for people. Etc. is literally and the other things. So etc. is usually used for things, although I don't always keep to that. So Philo, interesting because he's a contemporary of Christ, right? He was born a little bit earlier than Christ. He lived to be about 70, so he was born about 20 BC, died 50 AD. Christ, as you guys know, died rather young. So it's interesting to see a contemporary author, and but he's mainly a theologian. He's a Jew, but a Hellenistic Jew, meaning he's writing in Greek, right? And he's a Platonist. Neoplatonism is more like 200 BC AD, so I would call this Middle Platonism. Because Plato, is like 350, he died, I think, 367 BC. So this is a Middle Platonism. But see, already in Philo Judaeus, he's trying to relate the ideas to God. So he's saying ideas are God's thoughts, right? Then Seneca, who was a Stoic, but the Stoics are pretty eclectic and kind of syncretistic. So he says something similar, not obviously having read Philo. This is just people independently reaching the same conclusion. And you could say, oh, well, Philo must have said that because he had the Bible. Well, Seneca most certainly did not have the Bible. He was a Stoic. And right, Christianity was some weird. Christianity was not part of the civilization. It was not really understood what it was. It's part of why it was so vigorously persecuted, because it was misrepresented. You can imagine like cannibalism and things like that. Okay, and then Augustine, of course, but Augustine is taking it from the Neoplatonists, this distinction, at least that the ideas are God's thoughts. So, right, instead of in Plato himself, it's not clear, like, it seems like the ideas might be outside of God, right? He never really seems to address that in any satisfactory or extensive way. Okay, number one, Christian?
Number 1, forms of goodness, truth, oneness, etc., equivalent to God himself. Number 2, forms of lesser things, for example, horses, cows, ideas in God's mind.
All right, so the form of goodness, the form of truth, that is just God himself. Like, God is goodness itself. God is truth itself. Now, I'm not sure. I'd have to research if Proclus says that. If it's kind of complicated. I mean, certainly we're going to read Plotinus, so we'll come back to that in a sense. But the forms of lesser things, that those are ideas in God's mind. That's already in Seneca and Philo. So this is how Aquinas states it. I just want to show you that a lot of it was already, the ideas were already there, but Aquinas, as usual, states it with extremely great clarity and in greater detail and so on. Okay. Any question there? Is that good? Yep.
Just clarifying for Friday, we are gonna instead of logic first, we're gonna do the.
Does everyone want to do that? Okay, so that
Yes.
means Friday at 8:15, we'll do the vocabulary and the textual
So
identifications.
we're reversing the
Yeah,
class.
let's do that, yeah.
And if you finish early, go outside.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you need a little more time, we have a, what, a 10-minute,
10-minute
15-minute
break.
break, so, yeah. But usually people actually finish early, because we're dividing the test into 2 days, so.
So it's just definitions and fragments.
Just definition on Friday and then the essay on Monday.
How are you gonna do the Plato fragments, or are they just gonna be?
As it
pulled?
says there, if Plato state which work, whether it's the Republic or the
So
Symposium.
there's just gonna be pulled from this work and we'll just have to
Yes,
recognize it?
from the horizontal handout. And just, you know, right, I mean, there is a pretty significant difference, like Diotima said, that's the Symposium. Imagine you're in a cave, or that's the Republic, and
These.
just from the
It could be
style.
pulled from either republic?
Exactly, yeah, that's, if you look on page 11, it does state that. If you look on page 11 of the definition sheet.